Never before had anyone seen such a sight in the unforgiving Arizona territory of 1878. A young white girl, no older than 16, hung suspended from a towering saguaro cactus, a crudely painted sign around her neck proclaiming Indian land. Her name was Sarah, and she dangled there, eyes wide with terror, the scorching sun beating down, promising a slow, agonizing end. Every breath was a struggle, every beat of her heart a desperate plea for salvation. What if I told you that in just 22 minutes, you could witness how one lonely Comanche warrior, a man named Hakan, stumbled upon this impossible scene and changed not just Sarah's fate, but the very course of his own destiny? Everyone thought the frontier was a place of endless conflict, a land where white settlers and Native Americans were locked in an eternal, bloody struggle. But what happened next challenged every preconceived notion, every ingrained fear. Hakan, a man hardened by years of solitude and the loss of his family to settler violence, should have ridden past. His tribe had been decimated, his spirit broken. Yet, something in Sarah's desperate eyes, a flicker of humanity amidst the cruelty, compelled him to act. This wasn't just about cutting a girl down from a cactus. It was about two worlds colliding, two souls on the brink of despair, finding an unexpected connection in the vast, indifferent wilderness. The moment Hakan realized he couldn't leave her to die, everything he believed about his solitary existence shattered. He knew the risks. Rescuing a white girl could mean war with the nearby cavalry, betrayal from his own people, or worse, a return to the very pain he'd spent years outrunning. But as he cautiously approached, the dry desert wind whispering forgotten tales of peace and peril, he saw not an enemy, but a reflection of his own vulnerability. What happened next changed everything, not just for Sarah, but for a man who had sworn off hope forever. The sun beat down on the parched earth, baking the vast expanse of the Texas Panhandle into a shimmering mirage. Dust devils danced in the distance, mocking the desperate thirst of anyone caught without water. For 18-year-old Elara Vance, the heat was just another layer of the suffocating despair that had settled over her family's homestead. Her father, a man hardened by years of futile toil, had finally admitted defeat. The crops had withered, the well had dried, and now the bank was threatening foreclosure. Elara watched him from the porch, his shoulders slumped as he spoke to her mother, their voices low and strained. She knew what they were discussing. The whispers had grown louder each day, like the buzz of locusts before a plague. They talked of moving back east, of abandoning the dream they had chased across 1,000 miles. But Elara couldn't imagine leaving. This land, harsh and unforgiving as it was, had become a part of her. She remembered her father's pride when they first staked their claim, the hoe, peaceful gleam in his eyes as he spoke of a new beginning. Now, only weariness remained. One sweltering afternoon, as Elara was mending a tear in her worn calico dress, a rider appeared on the horizon. He was a stranger, tall and gaunt, his face obscured by the wide brim of his hat. He rode a lathered horse, kicking up a plume of dust that coated everything in a fine, gritty film. Elara's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and a strange, unbidden hope. Perhaps he carried news, a solution, anything to break the suffocating silence of their impending ruin. The stranger dismounted slowly, his movements stiff. He introduced himself as Mr. Silas Croft, an agent for the railroad. Her father emerged from the house, his brow furrowed with suspicion. Mr. Croft spoke of a new rail line, one that would cut directly through their property. He offered a sum of money, a significant amount, enough to pay off their debts and perhaps even start anew somewhere else. Elara's father listened intently, his eyes widening with each figure Mr. Croft recited. It was an offer that seemed too good to be true, a lifeline thrown just as they were about to drown. But as Mr. Croft laid out the papers, a cold dread began to creep into Elara's heart. There was a clause, buried deep within the legal jargon, that stipulated they had to vacate the land within 2 weeks. 2 weeks to pack up a lifetime, to sever ties with the only home Elara had ever truly known. Her father, blinded by the promise of financial salvation, barely hesitated. He signed, his hand trembling slightly, sealing their fate. Elara felt a profound sense of betrayal, a sharp pang of loss that was more painful than any physical ache. This wasn't a rescue. It was an eviction, wrapped in the guise of a generous offer. As Mr. Croft rode away, leaving a trail of dust and a signed contract in his wake, Elara knew their struggle was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. The signed contract lay on the rough-hewn table, a stark reminder of their defeat. Elara picked it up, the paper feeling flimsy yet impossibly heavy in her hands. Her father sat slumped by the empty fireplace, staring into the cold ashes as if seeking warmth that was long gone. Her mother moved about the small cabin, her usual bustling energy replaced by a quiet, almost mournful efficiency. The silence was louder than any argument, filled with unspoken accusations and the crushing weight of shattered dreams. Elara couldn't shake the image of Mr. Croft's thin smile, the way his eyes had lingered on their land with an almost predatory glint. He hadn't been offering a lifeline, he had been seizing an opportunity. This wasn't just about money. It was about something far deeper, a severing of roots that had begun to take hold. She walked out onto the porch, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a cruel beauty over a landscape that no longer felt like home. A few days later, a small contingent of men arrived, surveying the eel and pounding stakes into the earth where the rail line would run. They worked with a detached efficiency that grated on Elara's nerves. One afternoon, she confronted their foreman, a burly man with a perpetually scowling face. "What exactly are you building?" she demanded, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts to sound resolute. He merely grunted, pointing vaguely towards the horizon. "Progress, girl. Something you wouldn't understand." His dismissive tone ignited a spark of defiance within her. Elara spent her days riding their one remaining horse, following the survey lines, trying to understand the path of this monstrous iron snake that would bisect their world. She discovered that the proposed route cut directly through the small, hidden spring that had sustained their family during the driest months, a detail Mr. Croft had conveniently omitted. This wasn't just about the house. It was about their very survival, about the lifeblood of the land itself. That evening, Elara confronted her father, the contract clutched in her hand. "Did you know about the spring, Papa? Did he tell you they would destroy it?" Her voice was tight with accusation. He flinched, turning away. He mentioned some minor adjustments to the water flow. Said it wouldn't matter once the railroad brought in new settlers, new opportunities. His words sounded hollow, even to him. "It matters, Papa. It matters everything," Elara cried, the betrayal searing through her. Her father, usually so firm, looked utterly defeated, the weight of his decision crushing him. The railroad's arrival wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a slow, deliberate strangulation. Elara's world, once defined by the rhythmic creak of the windmill and the endless horizon, now shrank with each passing day. The railroad, an abstract threat just weeks ago, materialized with startling speed. Surveyors with their tripods and measuring chains swarmed the fields, their presence a constant, grating reminder of the encroaching future. Her father, a man who had once faced down blizzards and droughts with grim determination, moved like a ghost through their home, his spirit broken. He rarely spoke, his eyes fixed on some distant, unseen point of no return. One morning, Elara found him sitting on the porch, not watching the sunrise as he usually did, but staring at the newly staked wooden markers that crisscrossed their land. A heavy silence hung between them, broken only by the incessant buzz of flies. "We have to go, Elara," he finally whispered, his voice raspy. "There's nothing left for us here." The words, though expected, still struck her like a physical blow. She wanted to argue, to rail against the injustice, but the fight had drained out of her, replaced by a hollow ache. Days blurred into a monotonous cycle of packing. Her mother, her face etched with sorrow, carefully wrapped their few fragile possessions. Each item, from the chipped porcelain doll Elara had loved as a child to her fat, hers worn leather Bible, felt heavy with the weight of abandonment. Elara moved through the tasks mechanically, her thoughts a whirlwind of what-ifs and unspoken goodbyes. She imagined the train, a monstrous iron beast, tearing through the land she loved, leaving a scar where their home once stood. The false hope arrived in the form of a letter, delivered by a dusty rider. It bore the seal of the county clerk and spoke of a newly discovered land claim error, a technicality that might, delay the railroad's progress through their property. Elara's heart leaped with a frantic, desperate joy. She burst into the house, waving the letter, her voice hoarse with excitement. "Papa! Mama! Look, we might have more time." Her father, however, only looked at the parchment with weary eyes, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. He knew with a certainty that chilled Elara to the bone that such small victories rarely lasted against the relentless march of progress. Her father's skepticism proved tragically accurate. The very next day, a confrontational delegation from the railroad arrived, led by Mr. Croft himself, his smile colder than ever. He dismissed the letter as a minor clerical error, easily rectified, and presented a revised, non-negotiable offer for their land. It was less than the original, a deliberate insult, a final twist of the knife. Elara watched, helpless, as her father, his shoulders slumped in defeat, signed the papers. The pen scratched loudly in the silent room, each stroke sealing their fate. The dream of the Vance homestead, once a beacon of hope, was officially extinguished. The scratch of the pen had been a death knell, echoing in Elara's ears long after the railroad agent, Mr. Croft, had departed. Her father, a man once defined by his quiet strength, now moved like a ghost through their meager home. The air thickened with unspoken despair, a suffocating blanket that pressed down on Elara's chest. They had lost everything, not with a bang, but with a whimper and a signature. Days bled into weeks, each one heavier than the last. The Vances packed their few belongings, the silence between them punctuated only by the creak of floorboards and the rustle of faded cloth. Elara tried to imagine a new beginning, a fresh start, but the future felt like a vast, empty prairie stretching endlessly before her. One morning, as Elara helped her mother fold linens, a rider approached. It wasn't Mr. Croft, but a younger man, dressed in a sharp suit, with an unsettlingly eager glint in his eyes. He introduced himself as Mr. Sterling, an associate of the railroad. He wasn't there to offer aid. He was there to deliver a final, brutal blow. The railroad, he explained with a practiced smile, had reevaluated their plans. Due to unforeseen logistical challenges, the rail line would no longer pass directly through the Vance property. Instead, it would run a few miles north. Therefore, the railroad was exercising a clause in the contract, the right to reclaim the land without further compensation if the proposed route changed. Elara's father stood frozen, his face ashen. The initial payment, the one that had been just enough to settle their debts, was now considered rent. They were to vacate the property within the week, leaving everything behind. Elara felt a cold fury rise within her. This wasn't just misfortune. It was a calculated betrayal. They had been stripped bare, not by nature, but by the deceit of men. Her father, finally breaking his silence, pleaded with Mr. Sterling, his voice hoarse with desperation. He cited the signed agreement, the initial promises. Mr. Sterling merely shrugged, a dismissive gesture that spoke volumes. He then handed Elara's father a single, crisp banknote, a paltry sum, barely enough for a single night's lodging, presented as a final goodwill gesture. Elara watched her father crumble, his spirit extinguished. The injustice burned within her, a searing ember in the desolate landscape of their ruin. She looked at the homestead, the only home she had ever known, now a hollow shell. This wasn't just about land. It was about dignity, about the broken promise of a new life. As Mr. Sterling rode away, leaving them utterly destitute, Elara knew she couldn't simply walk away. Something had to be done. Elara stood on the porch, the sun dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The injustice of their situation, the raw betrayal, gnawed at her. Mr. Sterling's words, cold and dismissive, echoed in her mind. This wasn't merely about losing land. It was about the systematic dismantling of a dream, the crushing of her family's spirit. Her father sat inside, a silent, defeated figure, her mother weeping softly beside him. Alara knew she couldn't let this stand. There had to be a way, a loophole, something they had missed. A sudden thought, sharp and clear, cut through her despair. The original deed. Her father had always been meticulous, keeping every important document in a small, locked strongbox in his study. Perhaps there was something in it, some forgotten clause, a detail Mr. Sterling had overlooked in his haste to dispossess them. Hope, fragile but persistent, flickered within her. She moved with a newfound urgency, slipping into the dim study. The strongbox was heavy, its iron cold beneath her fingers. She fumbled with the key, her heart hammering against her ribs. Inside, nestled amongst old letters and faded photographs, she found it. A brittle, yellow document, not the deed to their current property, but an older, forgotten land grant. It detailed a small, isolated parcel of land, deep within Comanche territory, granted to her great-grandfather decades ago for services rendered during a forgotten skirmish. The land was barren, remote, seemingly worthless, yet the grant was legally binding, signed and sealed by the territorial governor himself. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was all they had. The next morning, Alara confronted her father, the old document clutched in her hand. His eyes, dulled by sorrow, widened as he recognized the grant. He had forgotten all about it, dismissed it as a relic of a bygone era. "It's nothing, Alara," he said, his voice raspy. "That land is worthless, and it's surrounded by Comanche. No one goes there." But Alara saw something else, a chance, however slim, to reclaim a piece of their destiny. She argued passionately, her voice gaining strength with each word, until a flicker of his old resolve returned. Their confrontation was brief, but intense. Alara refused to yield. She would not let them wither away. She proposed they move to this forgotten parcel, to claim what was rightfully theirs, even if it meant venturing into the unknown. Her mother, initially hesitant, saw the fierce determination in Alara's eyes and slowly, reluctantly agreed. This was their last hope, a desperate flight into the wilderness, trading one desolate future for another, potentially more perilous one. They would leave the homestead behind, but they would not leave their spirit. The journey would be long, dangerous, and uncertain, but for the first time in days, Alara felt a surge of purpose. They would go, and they would survive. The journey west was a crucible, each mile forging Alara's resolve. The vast, indifferent landscape tested them daily, but the family pressed on, their shared determination a silent promise. They crossed rivers swollen with spring melt, their wagon wheels sinking into treacherous mud. Nights were spent beneath an impossibly wide sky, the stars a cold, distant comfort. Yet Alara found a strange peace in the quiet rhythm of their travel. She learned to read the subtle signs of the land, to distinguish the whisper of the wind from the rustle of a snake, to find water where none seemed to exist. This was a different kind of education, one far removed from the ledgers and etiquette lessons of her youth, and it suited her. Just when their supplies dwindled to a dangerous few, and the endless horizon threatened to break their spirits, a small, unassuming sign appeared. It was weathered, almost swallowed by the tall prairie grass, but its message was clear. Willow Creek Trading Post 5 miles. A surge of relief, so potent it brought tears to Alara's eyes, washed over them. They pushed the weary horses harder, the promise of civilization a powerful lure. The trading post was more than just a stop. It was a crossroads of lives. Dust-caked travelers from every direction converged there, sharing news, trading goods, and exchanging stories of triumph and hardship. Alara found herself drawn to a group of women, their faces etched with the sun and wind, but their eyes alive with an unyielding strength. They were homesteaders, like her family, but further along in their journey, their voices filled with practical advice and hard-won wisdom. One woman, a formidable figure named Martha, took Alara under her wing, ring tips on preserving food, mending tools, and, most importantly, cultivating resilience. Alara absorbed every word, her mind buzzing with possibilities. She realized survival wasn't just about enduring hardship. It was about adapting, innovating, and building community. The fear that had once shadowed her thoughts began to recede, replaced by a quiet confidence. She saw her parents, too, slowly shedding the weight of their past failures. Her father, invigorated by the new prospects, spent hours discussing farming techniques with other settlers, his eyes once again holding that familiar spark of hope. Her mother, though still reserved, found solace in sharing recipes and stories with the other women, a faint smile gracing her lips more often. The decision to move west had been born of desperation, a last resort against ruin. But as Elara looked out at the bustling trading post, at the faces filled with both weariness and hope, she understood. This wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. They had not merely survived the journey. They had transformed, shedding the old skin of their past and emerging stronger, more capable, and truly alive. The land still held challenges, but Elara no longer faced them with dread. She faced them with a quiet determination, ready to build a new life, brick by brick, under the vast, unyielding, yet utterly beautiful western sky. The dust settled, revealing the true cost of Elara's desperate gamble. Her father, his face etched with a grief deeper than any she had ever witnessed, stood before her, not with anger, but with a profound, crushing disappointment. His ranch, their legacy, was gone, traded for a daughter he barely recognized. Elara saw the reflection of her own selfish choices in his broken gaze. The Comanche, standing bare, watched from a distance, his silence a heavy judgment. Suddenly, a rider galloped into view, a breathless deputy. He delivered news that twisted the knife in Elara's heart. The land deed she had signed was a forgery. The man who had promised her freedom had instead sold her family's future to a ruthless land baron, long before her desperate act. A cold wave of despair washed over her. She had sacrificed everything for nothing. Her father, despite his pain, stepped forward, his voice a raw whisper. "We made a choice, Elara. We chose to fight, and we chose to trust. We lost the land, but we still have each other." It was a moment of false hope, a desperate attempt to mend what was irrevocably broken. Then, Standing Bear approached. He spoke, his voice low and resonant, revealing a truth that shattered Elara's carefully constructed world. He had known about the forged deed all along. He had seen the land baron's true intentions, had tried to warn her father, but his pleas had been dismissed as the ramblings of a savage. He had allowed Elara to make her desperate sacrifice, hoping it would finally open her father's eyes to the true nature of their enemy and to the common ground they shared. Against him, Elara stared at him, betrayed. Yet in his eyes, she saw not malice, but a weary wisdom. The confrontation was stark. Her father, reeling from the double blow of betrayal and his own blindness, finally understood. The real fight was not between them, but against the forces that sought to divide and conquer. The land was lost, but a new, fragile alliance was forged in the ashes of their shared loss, a promise of a future built on understanding, not on the bitter divisions of the past.